Did you know that two men may be responsible for almost entirely taking out a full decade of players when it comes to winning the Balon d'Or? Can you have a guess who they might be? The Balon d'Or is the richest individual prize in all of football or soccer. It is awarded each year to the most outstanding player based on individual performances as well as club and international success. Although the winners are sometimes questioned by the general public, especially on social media. The award began in 1956 with Sir Stanley Matthews, the legend that is and was, picking up the inaugural honour on the 18th of December of that year. In 2020, during the global pandemic, due to the COVID-19 outbreak, the Ballon d'Or ceremony could not take place, and it is the only year since its inception that the award was not presented. Although, we all know who truly won. Justice for Lewandowski. So, on to the problem, and the decade in question is, of course, the Golden Generation, the greatest decade ever to exist, my decade, the 90s. Now, if you were born in January 1990, you'd be 35, like Mr. Tony Cruz, who sadly retired far too early, and Mr. Nacho, who's gone to Saudi Arabia, I believe, but was at Real Madrid for the vast majority of his career, and both coming to the end of their powers, or powers have finished. And on the flip side of the scale, if you were born in December 1999, like Mr. Reece James and Mr. Reece Nelson, spelt differently, by the way, you'd be 25 and in your peak or approaching your peak. Not that I'm saying the injuries don't matter for Reece James, but he's still a great player. There is a list of unbelievable players who were born in the 1990s, including the aforementioned Tony Cruz, Mr. Antoine Griezmann, Neymar, Mbappe, Harry Kane, Kevin De Bruyne, all of whom have never won and could easily have won a Ballon d'Or. There's also Mo Salah, although he's favourite to win this year's award. To date, out of thousands of players born in the 1990s to have played professional football, only one man has achieved this feat, and that is the current holder, Mr. Rodri from Manchester City, the greatest holding midfielder in world football. So we ask the question, why is that? Well, as I alluded to earlier, there might be two footballing giants born in the 1980s who've created this problem. When looking at the numbers of winners from each decade, you can see a pattern. There are 68 winners of the famous gold ball, and they go as follows. In the 1910s, standing alone, the man we've already mentioned, Sir Stanley Matthews, 1910s. That is well over 100 years ago that Sir Stanley was born. How mental is that to think about? Next up, in the 1920s, we have arguably one of the greatest goalkeepers of all time, the man from FIFA itself, Yashin, and we have two wins for Di Stefano, the legendary Real Madrid striker. Next up, the 1930s, with an increase. 5 people won it from this decade. Sir Bobby Charlton, we've got Massapust, we've got Sivori, we've got Luis Suarez, not that one, of course, and we have Coppa, who ended up getting the Young Player of the Year award. Coppa, the Coppa Gold Ball, named after him. We then more than double the winners from 5 to 11 different winners or different golden balls won in the decade of the 1940s, with 2 by Beck, 3 by Johan Cruyff, the legend, 1 by Gerd Miller, 1 by Riviera, 1 by Georgie Best, the best ever, 1 by Albert, 1 by Eusebio, and 1 by the goal scoring hero who recently passed away, Dennis Law. Takes us nicely into the 1950s, which is, of course, the decade that the award was actually created. We've got 3 wins for Michel Platini. We've got 1 for Rossi. We've got 1 for KHR. We've got 2 for Kevin Keegan. We've got 1 for Simonsen. And we've got 1 for Blocken. The swinging 60s are up next with Mr. Sama, the unlikely winner from 1996 or 7. We've got George Weah, the first and only African winner of the award to date, if Mo Salah wins it. We've got Stoikov, we've got Baggio, we've got 3 wins for the amazing Marco van Basten, career taken from us far too early. We've got Papin, the hero from FIFA. We've got Lothar Matthäus, the absolute beast of a German. We've got Ruud Gullit, and we've got Balanoff. Into the 1970s. Now, these are the players that you will have actually seen play football if you're my age, or if you're younger than that, then obviously you won't have seen it. But 9 winners from the 1970s, including Fabio Cannavaro, the only defender to have won it to date. We've got Andrei Shevchenko, the amazing AC Milan striker. We've got Pavel Nedved, who probably robbed the award from Thierry Henry back in the early 2000s, but we won't talk about that. We've got R9, who won it in 2 different decades. We've got Michael Owen, who won it as a very young man when he was at Liverpool. We've got Luis Figo, who was absolutely phenomenal the year he won it for Barcelona and Real Madrid. And we've got Zinedine Zidane, as well as Rivaldo, the Brazilian from the trail that was often not talked about. And now for the decade in question. Now, as you can see, the most winners from a single decade was 11. Yet Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo have won 13 combined alone. The rest of the decade looks like this. Before the Messi Ronaldo dominance, there was Ronaldinho and Kaká, both unbelievable winners in the 2000s. But then after that, you can't simply blame the two GOATs and give them all of the cause for this issue. That would be far too harsh. There's 2 wins as well for Modric and Benzema, both in their 30s, which have helped add misery to those born late in the last century. Now, there is light at the end of the tunnel for the 1990s kids, at least for a select few. There's little doubt in people's minds that one Kylian Mbappe will hold the prestigious ball before he hangs up his boots, and at only 26, he has plenty of time left to add to his tally. As mentioned earlier, the Egyptian king, Mohamed Salah, is currently favourite for the 2025 prize, with Liverpool hot favourite for a Premier League and Champions League double under this guy. There's also players such as AC Milan sensation Rafael, Newcastle Swedish Superman Isak, and Real Madrid midfield maestro Valverde, all 25 or 26, with plenty of miles left on the clock, who were born during the prestigious decade of 1990. There is unfortunately one major problem though, and that is the 2000s babies. Being sandwiched between 2 of the greatest players to ever lace up a pair of boots and the new generation of monsters is a pretty uncomfortable place to be for those 1990s kids. The players who were born this century are gunning for the top prizes, and they include the last 2 runners up, Mr. Erling Haaland and Vinicius Jr. These 2 are guaranteed to be in the mix for years to come. Other major names born in 2000s include Phil Foden, Saka, Rodrigo, Afastalia, sorry I butchered that, Saliba, Elise, Cole Palmer, Nico Williams, Barcoli, Jude Bellingham, Wirtz, Musiala. The list truly does go on and on of players that are either between 20 and 23 years old. So, in conclusion, we were blessed to see 2 of the greatest players of all time, the 2 players that we'll tell our children and grandchildren about, players who've been immortalised and will live forever. But they did first screw over the poor 1990s. I'm only joking. Kind of. Whilst I am sure there will be at least another 3 Balon d'Or wins for the 1990s between Salah and Mbappe alone, they will still fall well short of the 1940s and 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. But I'm sure these 2 won't lose much sleep over it.